On to the business of the convention. Nominations for the Democratic Party's candidate for Member of Congress of the United States from the 5th Congressional Districts. Are there any nominations? I will call on my good friend from Danbury, Representative Joseph Taborsak, for a nomination.
His word to me, if you didn't hear it under his breath, was short. Not too surprised, but I'm going to do my best. But there is quite a bit to say about this very, very impressive Democrat we have here named Chris Murphy. Just want to thank Mayor Jarjura, I don't know where you went out there you are, for hosting this very important convention. How fitting is it that we are in a brass city here, a city that really was built on our nation's most important, most valuable resource, and that is our workforce. That we are here today convening for a candidate who has been a true advocate for working people. I just wanted to point that out before I get started. It's very appropriate. Fellow Democrats, there is no doubt that a positive movement is taking place in 2008, and all things seem to indicate that this will be a good year for Democrats. Over the past year, we have witnessed overwhelming public interest and record turnouts at Democratic voting locations across the entire nation. What's more, young voters who historically have been uninvolved, disillusioned, and occasionally apathetic are actively campaigning for better health care, more affordable tuition, and for an end to the war in Iraq. Young, old, black, white, Latino, blue-collar and white-collar Americans are tuned in rather than turned off by the prospect and possibility that government can once again prove to be an instrument of good, a vehicle for progress, and a place where voices of the electorate are heard loud and clear above those of the corporate lobbyists and special interests. My God, it has been a long 8 years. Indeed, we are at a crossroads in the voter census. Accepting the status quo is no longer an option. But a good thing happened 2 years ago. Let's not forget, a young upstart from Cheshire showed that he knew this change was coming about. He was ahead of the curve and ready to lead the charge against the status quo when he challenged a 24-year Republican incumbent for her seat in Congress that few believed he could win. Far removed from the political machine in Washington, he went to the people of Connecticut with his vision for reform and his message of change, and found that this was a vision they shared and hungered for. He listened to their concerns, responded to their questions, presented his solutions, and most of all, he worked his tail off and won that unwinnable seat. Thank God. It was the first of what would be many impressive accomplishments he spearheaded as a first-term member of Congress. That candidate was Chris Murphy. That November, almost 2 years ago now, something very good happened in Connecticut, something very right. Chris Murphy was elected to Congress, and the people of the 5th District of Connecticut had a voice again in their federal government. In some parts of the district, a voice they hadn't had in decades. True to his word, the new congressman was a driving force behind taking on special interests, fighting to make sure that firms like Blackwater, profiting off the war in Iraq, are held accountable to the American taxpayers. True to his word, Chris has been a driving force behind ethics reform, energizing 21 members of Congress's freshman class to support a citizens' ethics panel and advocating for meaningful ethics oversight as a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. True to his word, Chris fought for our seniors, opposing Bush's cuts to Medicaid, and fought for consumers targeted by the underhanded practice of predatory lending. Always an advocate for our young people, Chris fought for affordable college tuition and expanded health coverage for Connecticut's children. Chris Murphy has fought for many, many causes important to the people of the 5th Congressional District, too many to list here now. But the one thing that stands out in my mind, which affected my district, and which I believe tells a lot about the integrity of this man, is when Chris Murphy took on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also known as FERC. because they didn't want to listen to the people. The people who stood to be impacted by the Candlewood Lake Shoreline Management Plan. And don't you know that when the dust settled, that public hearing not only took place, but the federal government came here. The people had their voices heard, and the federal government right in their own backyard. Undoubtedly, that amendment and that maneuver lost Chris some friends in Washington, but it gained him this supporter for life. Chris Murphy is the epitome of the good public servant, and his record proves it. And then along comes 2008, all things indicating a great year for the Democrats, but overly optimistic metaphors like tidal wave coming and record year are being used to describe the potential coattails the Democratic presidential nominee might bring to those lower on the ticket, those like Chris Murphy and others, including myself. But friends, that is where the danger lies, and when times are good, complacency is lurking just around the corner. 2 years ago, Nancy Johnson, with her 24 years of Washington experience, took for granted a state senator from Cheshire who was willing to work, who offered ideas over cliches, who had solutions where others had rhetoric, and who was dedicated to making government work for people. 2 years ago today, Nancy Johnson didn't see it coming, and Chris Murphy pulled off the unthinkable upset. I stand here today reminded that we must not make the same mistake Nancy Johnson made and take this man for granted. We cannot be complacent and take for granted the great representation we have now in the 5th District in Chris Murphy. So the question of the day is, what will we do to make sure that we re-elect Chris Murphy this November? We'll work. We know how to work, and then we'll work some more. That's what we'll do, because we know what the Republicans have been trying to figure out for years, that hard work will beat the politics of fear and distortion every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And if State Senator Cappiello's remarks yesterday are any indication of how he's going to run his campaign, folks, they still haven't figured it out. In Chris Murphy, we are offered a new brand of politics, a new kind of government, a new generation of leadership. It is politics that recognizes that those elected to office are there to serve, not to rule. It is a government that is transparent and accountable to the people it represents. And it is a new generation of leadership that chooses political action over political posturing, that chooses to listen rather than a lecture. And most importantly, that chooses the future over the past. It is a kind of governing that enlists us, you and I, in the effort, making a collective push for meaningful change. Fellow Democrats, Chris Murphy may be the incumbent, but he is the only candidate in this race for real change in Washington, D.C. And let's not be fooled. And let's not be fooled. The Republicans will go to their old bag of tricks, fear, distortion, and smear tactics. And in fact, they've already started. After all, they can't win on the issues with Chris or with his track record. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "The most dangerous thing is illusion." Well, I don't know about you, but I've had enough of Republican illusions. Ask one of the many thousands of Connecticut residents losing their home to foreclosure how the Bush tax cuts for the rich and trickle-down economics are doing for them now. Ask any of them. The Republicans are not going to talk about that. They're not going to talk about 8 years of failed Republican policies and the hard realities that these failures have created. They're not going to talk about how they're fighting for government reform, and they're not going to talk about fighting for affordable, high-quality health care for all. They're not going to talk about taking on special interests, and I am more than sure they are not going to talk about the corporations getting rich off the war in Iraq. But we know who will, don't we? That's Chris Murphy. And he'll do more than just talk. He'll do more than just talk, and he has a record to prove it. That's Chris Murphy. That's the candidate for change. That's the candidate for people. The Democrat, Chris Murphy. But my friends, make no mistake, we all have a job to do. We have to get out there and make sure that everybody knows just what is at stake in this important congressional race. Let's learn at least one thing from Nancy Johnson. Let's not take this man for granted, and let's make damn sure we get him reelected. And so standing here, I ask you all to join me and take an active role in this very important effort to ensure that we send Chris Murphy back to Congress for his second term. Chris Murphy, the candidate for the people. Chris Murphy, the candidate for change. Chris Murphy, the tireless public servant. And the Democratic candidate I am proud to nominate for re-election. Thank you very much.